Huh? What's going on? All my things are gone. What happened?
I threw it all away.
Excuse me?
I sold the house too. All the money from selling the house is mine.
I was away from home for my father's funeral, and what awaited me was an outrageous truth and a stupid, dumb husband. To my husband, Tyler, who looked triumphant, I simply asked him a question. Do you really think that what you did was okay? My name is Lara. I am 40 years old, and I work as well as I am a housewife. My husband Tyler and I have been married for 15 years. Although my husband and I have had many fights and arguments, we have still managed to keep our marriage going for this long. I am sure it is all thanks to our son. My husband and I have a 10-year-old son named Phil. Because of our son, even if my husband and I had fights and arguments, I would never go as far as to divorce him. And then, before I knew it, I realized that 15 years had already passed since we got married. I thought that I would continue to stay married to my husband and watch our son grow up together with Tyler. Recently, however, I have a slight concern about something. And that was about my father, who lives alone at his home. My father had always been weak due to a chronic illness, and he had been visiting the hospital. Furthermore, after the death of my mother a few years ago, he became even more susceptible to health problems. Since my father lives far away, it is not easy for me to visit him. Recently, I have been calling him frequently to ask about his condition. He tries not to worry me by laughing and saying things like,
I'm just getting old.
But I can tell just by the way he sometimes coughs that he is in a pretty bad shape. He was even rushed to the hospital after a neighbor found him collapsed from a seizure. And since my father needs to be hospitalized several times, my uncle and his family, who lives in the same area, would take care of him. However, a few months ago, my uncle informed me that he and his eldest son and his wife were moving out of the area due to their new jobs. This would mean that no one would be there to take care of my father. So I started going to my father's house every weekend to take care of my father. It takes 3 hours each day to drive to my father's house and come back home. So I would go to my father's house in the morning and come back at night, while my husband takes care of our son on the weekends. But my husband did not like me going over to my father's house that often.
Are you going to visit your father again?
Yes, so please take care of Phil.
Don't you ever think about my plans?
Oh, sorry. Did you have something to do?
Not today, but I like to go out whenever I want to, too, without being tied down like this.
You're right.
You won't be here since this morning, so lunch and dinner aren't even ready. And you haven't even boiled the bath or cleaned around the house.
I'm sorry. My husband seemed to have exploded in frustration and complained everything he had been stressed out about to me. I could only apologize and felt bad for Tyler. After that, he began to complain to me regularly. And when I came home at night, he would leave saying,
I'm going out for a drink because I've been invited by a friend.
I was really tired from driving for a long time, but I couldn't help but think that he was taking care of our son while I was gone, so I couldn't really complain to him about him going out like that. So my husband and I gradually began to grow apart, more and more. Then, as I was on my way to my father's place, as I always do, I suddenly received a phone call from my son. Phil, what's wrong? Mom, what should I do? The water in the toilet has stopped running. What? It looks like it's malfunctioning. Oh no, where's your father? Dad went out. What? My husband had gone somewhere without our son. If you think that you're not going to make it, go to the nearest supermarket. They have a toilet there. I'll go home once, okay? I drove back home at once. When I arrived home, my son was waiting for me with an anxious look on his face. Did you get to go to the toilet? Yes, I went to the bathroom at the nearby supermarket. Oh, that's a relief then. I immediately called the contractor to come and fix the toilet. Then I called my husband, but he wouldn't pick up any of my calls. Did your father say where he was going to? Nope. He told me to stay home because he had to run some errands. I thought since I'm in the 4th grade, I could at least stay at home on my own, but... My son was upset by the sudden trouble and looked a little down, thinking he couldn't take care of the house by himself. I see. That made you anxious, didn't it? I'm sorry. That's right. Do you want to go to Grandpa's house with me now? I'm sure Grandpa would be happy to see you, honey. Yes, I'll go. And so I took my son to visit my father. On the way, we bought some ice cream and ate it together. And when we arrived at my father's house, my father was also happy to see his grandson for the first time in a long time. If this was the case, I should have brought my son to my father's house every time. When I called my husband after arriving at my father's house, I still couldn't get through to him. What on earth was he doing? And since it was late afternoon when I arrived at my parents' house, I decided to stay at my parents' house today with my son.
Hello? Is that you, Lara? Phil disappeared when I took my eyes off of him for a minute.
When you took your eyes off of him for a minute?
Yeah. I asked him to stay at home because I was going to the store to do some shopping. But I wonder where he went.
Were you with him earlier?
Yeah, we were at home together the whole time, and I only left him alone for about 15 minutes.
You know, Phil is with me.
Huh?
Phil called me in the morning. He said he was in trouble because the toilet was broken. Phil told me that you've been out somewhere since then. I called you a few times now, but where have you been from this morning until now without answering any of my calls?
Well, that's...
And why did you lie to me earlier on? Is there something you don't want me to know? What my husband has said made me suspicious of him at once. Then, my husband suddenly became angry on the phone.
Don't be ridiculous. I mean, you're terrible for doing that when you're with Phil and not telling me earlier enough. And then listen silently as I'm talking in a panic, wondering where Phil went.
Well, that's because you started to lie about some things.
I went out because I thought Phil could stay home alone. Is that so bad? I mean, if you already took Phil with you, you should have done that from the beginning. You better give me back my time that I always took care of him on my days off, you know?
My husband completely ignored what he had done, but blamed me instead.
From now on, when you go back to your father's house, make sure you take Phil with you.
With that, my husband hung up the phone. Why was he so angry? It was true that my husband was busy with work, and leaving my son with my husband on the weekends might have been a burden for him. But I also work part-time during the week, and I do all the housework, so my husband is not the only one having a difficult time. But I don't think it is right for my husband to only complain to me. I stayed at my father's place with an uneasy feeling. And the next day I came home with my son in the late afternoon. But my husband was probably out and not at home. What on earth was he doing? It was around 10 p.m. when my husband came home. We didn't even say hello to each other because we had argued on the phone yesterday. After that, we didn't talk for a while. As a month or two went by, we began to talk a little more, but the distrust I had towards my husband grew more and more. Then, about 6 months after that phone argument, my father's health suddenly deteriorated. I rushed to the hospital. It was during summer vacation, so I took my son with me. My father was suddenly hospitalized and had to be in a hospital bed. I saw my father, talked with him briefly, stayed at my father's house for the time being, and went back to the hospital. Then my father's health got worse again, and sadly he passed away. When I saw my father with his eyes closed as if he were sleeping, I still could not feel that he had passed away. I then decided to stay at my father's house for a while for my father's funeral. I quickly purchased funeral clothes for my son, and I took the funeral clothes I had left at my father's house out of my closet. I called my husband to tell him of my father's passing, and asked him to come to the funeral. But to my shock, my husband said that he would not be there at the funeral because he had to go on a business trip. Wait a minute, you're my husband, but you won't come to the funeral?
You're the chief mourner for the funeral, right? Then there's no problem if I'm not there, right?
No, that's not the point. My father passed away, so you can take time off from work, can't you?
I don't feel comfortable taking time off to go to a funeral when it's not my actual family.
Excuse me?
Anyway, I'm not going, so you can go ahead with the funeral on your own.
No way. With that, my husband hung up the phone. I was so disgusted by him at this point, and I decided not to expect anything more from my husband. After that, my uncle and his son and his wife helped me prepare for the funeral, and for the time being, we managed to hold the funeral without any issues. After that, however, I was busy sorting out my parents' belongings and discussing about the inheritance, and it had been a week since the funeral. Although I still had a few days left on my bereavement leave, I still decided to return home once, so I took my son and went back home. But then, the next thing I saw was completely unbelievable. Huh? What's going on? When I entered the house, all my things were completely gone. I immediately questioned my husband about it, who was at home. All my things are gone. What happened? Then my husband made an outrageous statement.
I threw everything away.
What? What do you mean?
I'm leaving you.
Excuse me?
I'm starting a new life. So, I sold the house too. All the money from selling the house is mine.
What on earth is this person talking about? I was away from home for my father's funeral, and what awaited me was an unbelievable truth and a dumb husband.
I'm sick of living with you. Phil didn't have much things, so I left it behind here. So, take those and go back to your parents' place.
Towards my husband, who had a triumphant look on his face, I simply asked him a question. Do you really think that what you did was okay? When I asked him that, he looked at me with a confused look on his face.
What the hell do you mean? It's already sold, so it doesn't matter anymore. And here, fill this out quickly.
With that, he handed me the divorce papers. I took it and filled it out immediately on the spot. I had been concentrating on my father's funeral and had put it off for a while, but I knew I had to talk to my husband about our issues. But I am rather thankful that he initiated the divorce this way. I packed up my son's belongings and told Phil that we were leaving home. My son seemed to sense it somehow and got into the car right away. We returned to my parents' house again. I immediately requested an investigation to a private investigator. Considering my husband's recent behavior, he must be having an affair. And soon enough, I received the evidence from the private investigator. And what's more, I found out a surprising fact about Tyler. Tyler had sold the house without permission, used the money as collateral for a loan of $300,000, and built a new house. It was a house so that Tyler could live with his lover. I immediately hired a lawyer and consulted the issue with him. The house my husband sold without permission was originally in my father's name, which I was to inherit in the future. So, in other words, my husband was not the owner of the house, but he borrowed a large sum of money using my house and my land as collateral. There's no way he could have done that, and yet I had my lawyer prove to me that as the rightful owner of the property, my assets could not be used as collateral for my ex-husband's loan. With the help from my lawyer, the finance company easily understood the situation and immediately returned the house they had seized as collateral. When that happened, my ex-husband contacted me in a panic.
What the hell is going on? I heard that the house was returned to you.
Well, that's what happens when you sell something you don't own without any permission, right? Also, I looked up the fact that you had cheated on me behind my back. I'm going to charge you alimony and for child support.
Oh no.
My ex-husband's voice was trembling, and I could tell he was quite upset.
Oh, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble if I don't do something about this. The guys who lent me the money have suddenly changed their attitude and are demanding that I pay them back with huge interest.
Ha, I knew it that you didn't do it properly. But well, it's what you deserve.
Please, help me out. We were in love once, weren't we?
Tyler really is repulsive, that it makes me want to throw up. You're the one who betrayed me, didn't you? I don't even want to talk to you anymore. I filed for divorce and we're complete strangers now. If you ever come near me or Phil, I'll call the police on you. And you better pay me alimony and child support. Goodbye then. With that, I hung up the phone and blocked my ex-husband's phone number. Rumor has it that my ex-husband is desperately trying to pay off his debts, while being frightened by debt collectors every day. Because of that, Tyler has been dumped and rejected by his lover. And as for the alimony, he had not paid it yet, but he has been sending child support every 2 months or so, even though it is only a few dollars, as if he has affection for Phil. Well, I don't know what he is doing now, but I guess he's not leading a good life now. Meanwhile, I also sold my father's family home and the house I inherited from him, and started living with my son in a rented apartment near his school. The money from selling the house has been set aside for my son's future school fees, and for my retirement funds. My son seems to have already given up on his own father, and says he is happier living with me. He works hard at his studies and sports, and I will work as hard as I can, and earn a lot of money for my son. And I will continue to love my son and watch him grow up, as I always have, even if I become a single mother. It is crazy to mortgage a house that is not even yours without any permission. I think Lara was right to leave such a man like Tyler. From now on, I hope Lara and Phil lives a happy and joyful life together. Thank you for watching until the end. Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.